Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Created by landowners for landowners, we're proud to play a role in conserving the Texas legacy of wide open spaces.
Hi, I'm Hannah Blankenship, Talt's Stewardship Manager. Each conservation easement at Talt is tailored to meet each individual landowner's unique wishes. This may be to utilize the property for farming or livestock production, or to delineate a specific area for future building. I work to ensure these requests are upheld through annual monitoring. It is important to have support from individuals like you to continue our work here at Talt. If you haven't already, please donate to us today at www.txaglandtrust.org/support.
Well, welcome everyone to Beyond the Fence Line, our episode 19, kind of a hot topic, pun intended. We're going to be talking about the drought and how to, the things, the pressures that we face on a daily basis, as land managers. I got my dear friend and brother in Christ, Hugh Aljoe, with the Noble Research Institute. He's the Director of Producer Relations. And my friend, Dr. Chase Currie with the San Pedro Ranch down in Maverick and Dimmitt County. So Chase, Hugh, appreciate you guys joining us.
Yeah, no, looking forward to the opportunity, Chad. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And your topic's pretty timely as we're all looking at these drought monitors and trying to plan for it. And as Chase was talking just a little bit earlier, he's been experiencing it much longer than probably we have in this proximity, but it's an important topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we think about this podcast, it's about sharing information and knowledge and perspectives. And I think this is a great one. That there's a lot of tactics and a lot of ways to look at drought and how we manage through it and how do we manage before the drought, right? I mean, we always should be looking at it ahead. So, I'd say, let's really kind of start staging this talk about where we are today, and I printed off kind of the drought monitor, kind of looking at it right now. And, we're looking at kind of in the south of Oklahoma, Texas, we're 15% in extreme drought, pushing 50% in severe drought. Hugh, when I look in Oklahoma, you're probably pushing 70% in the extreme drought right now. We saw also the hottest December in record, more than 130 years this past year. Recently, Governor Abbott has issued a disaster declaration for more than 50 counties in response of these dry conditions. And I really want to open up our discussion really about talking about the conditions each of you are seeing locally. Chase, let's start with you down in South Texas and kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, so we've been a little unfortunate, if you will. Drought is part of our environment down here, and historically we plan for that and we manage for that. But since January of 2018, it has been exacerbated even more than it has been historically, and we've had very little rainfall, I should say consistent rainfall. And what we've been dealing with is these long extended periods of drought interrupted by what we call, pulses of moisture. And I'll give you an example of that. In 2018, we went from January 1 to August 10th with less than 3 inches of rain. And then we got nearly 12 inches of rain over about a 60-day period. But then after that, starting about November 2nd or 3rd, right there, we went November 2nd of 2018 all the way through May of 2019 with just over 2 inches. And so it's
Extremes.
It's a bit, it's very extreme. It's a bit difficult to plan for. And that has been our weather pattern, to be honest with you, since January of 18 up through now. And one of the I guess biggest problems that we've been facing is historically here in our part of the world, southwestern Dimmick County and southeastern Maverick County, there is historically we have our wettest 60-day stretch is September and October. You go back through all the historical records, and that's historically that's your wettest 60 days for our part of the world. Well, in 2018, we saw that pulse of moisture. However, in 19, 20, and 21, we did not. And actually 19, 20, and 21 were 3 of the 6 driest falls in southwestern Dimmick County since 1931. So we've had 3 falls now that have been extremely dry. And actually 2021, that stretch from September through December was the driest on record. And so it's been a bit difficult for us because we historically we have planned for that pulse of moisture, if you will, to stockpile forage. It's important for a lot of different reasons, ecologically, but we get this part of the world gets a pretty big flush of cool season annuals, what most refer to as winter weeds, which are extremely important in our part of the world. And then also it tends to set the table for the following spring. We have not experienced what some refer to as a wildflower spring in several years. And so long story short, we've been a bit unfortunate, been ranching in what some would call a rain shadow. Now, the upside to this is the drought has forced our hand, and we can discuss this in more detail here in a bit, to make some changes within our management so that we can be better prepared moving forward. And to be honest with you, these are changes we should have made years ago, but the drought forced our hand. So in a sense, it's been a blessing in disguise, if you can look at it that way.
Yeah, definitely bittersweet in a way. And sometimes those, like you said, kind of pressures pulled on us. That's where we dig down and really do our planning. I remember, Hugh and I've known each other a lot of times, and Hugh, maybe I'd like for you to kind of maybe talk about back in the 80s when you were ranching, outside College Station, right? And you had sort of the other way where, like you always say, back in that time period, everybody looked good, knew how to ranch.
Yeah, I started ranching there in 1985, and that was about that time when people were asking, are we in a new normal? And in parts of the South and, the Southwest United States had received above average rainfall for just about a decade. And I know in my experience on the 10 years I was at the ranch, I only had 1 year that was average, and all the others were above. So you can imagine even a guy, a green hand coming out of college can look really smart. And I looked really smart for about 10 years. And that's when I left. So maybe that was part of the reason.
Showed you how smart you were. You left at the right time.
Right? I left at the right time, maybe so. But I'll tell you what, you find out who really knows how to manage is when you get into those dry conditions. And rain, moisture covers up a lot of sins. And back to what Chase was talking about, when you really begin to face some of the trials that are going to come in in these rainfall patterns that we're seeing here lately, making good decisions right up front and beginning to have a good pasture management plan, well outlined along with some contingency plans, really help some of these operations be a lot more resilient than they would be otherwise.
So I mean,
yeah, and I think that's a good.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Chase.
No, I was going to say, I think Hugh makes a really good point there in the fact that what we're seeing here and the changes that we've made, we feel our results, from a range management standpoint, will become exponential over time. And what I mean by that is we will be better prepared for the next drought. And so I think that's a really good point. I think that's one to drive home, and the fact that, it's the more you can prepare and the more you learn how to prepare for these droughts, the more sustainable you are over the long term.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. Hugh, what are you seeing? I mean, you're talking to producers every day on a daily basis. Just looking at this drought map, looks like Noble's ranches are right in the midst of a pretty drought right now as well. And what are you seeing?
Well, we track the moisture here on a kind of a water year as well as the history before. So, looking back, even though last year we only received, 80 to 85% of our annual moisture, and in that course of that water year, we were behind, but rains came timely to a lot of our ranches. So we didn't really feel the effect until it cut off in September. And since then, we are about 75% below where we should be. So if Chase and them don't get the rains in the fall, we don't get the fall rainfall. And even though we have a bimodal or moisture pattern, typically we expect pretty good rains in April, May, or June. This year it was April, and then we had a couple of good rains through the growing season up until August. But we haven't received anything in the fall. So we've got producers that had calves going to go out on winter pasture, and there is no winter pasture or very little of it. So they're really beginning to take stock of what they have or don't have, beginning to ask those questions. How much longer is this going to our grass reserves are depleting pretty rapidly. Fortunately, on the other hand, it's been dry, so even the Bermuda grass has held up pretty good. But they know that there's a time frame. They've got to be thinking about how that spring is going to affect us, and if we don't have some spring moisture, how are we going to change our stocking?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all great points. We've been here before, right? I mean,
yeah.
And I want to kind of dive, in maybe a little bit of, maybe another layer of what you and Chase have already talked about. We experienced, and it doesn't seem like it was 10 years ago, but 2011, 10, that was back at my place there north of Brady, some of the worst drought we'd ever seen and had to deal with. What are you seeing? What are you looking at? I know both of you are always kind of constantly looking at the weather and the drought monitoring. Where you feel like we're heading into another 11, or what are your thoughts?
Chase, go ahead.
Well, we've been in an 11 now for 4 years, so it's been we're there. But one thing that we've noticed is, and I'm sure you all have noticed this as well, and more folks are discussing this, is we get these extreme swings in weather. And so historically here we've had May, June, September, October. Those are our two big rainfall periods, if you will. And then historically we get some rain scattered out through the year. But for instance, this past year we were extremely dry from January through the middle to latter part of May. We got some moisture the latter part of May and June. And then we actually had a wet July, early August. So our last rainfall event, measurable rainfall event that we've had here at the ranch, and we have 14 rain gauges scattered across the ranch. The last measurable rainfall event we had was August the 5th, 2021. So I don't know exactly what that is, 160 plus days since we've had a measurable rainfall event. But fortunately for us this year, we had an abnormally wet summer, and we had a mild summer. And so we were able to grow a lot of vegetation, this summer, which historically we don't do. It turns off very hot and very dry. It's not uncommon for us to see daytime temps over 110. Soil temperature on bare ground gets up to 150, 60 degrees. And so it can be a fairly inhospitable environment to grow vegetation. And, I always tell folks, in most years, we can be dormant. We can be very dormant, actually, the latter part of June, July, and August. And what I mean by that is our vegetation can be dormant. And so it's to us, it's we've had to make a transition to learn how to manage for these pulses, what we call pulses of moisture, and they can happen at any time, is what we're finding out over the past 4 or 5 years. And so we've just been we made some significant changes in our grazing program. And by doing that, we've been able to stockpile forage much more rapidly than we had in the past. And in turn, we can capitalize on those pulses of moisture. And for us in most years, we're obviously different than where Hugh is there in Oklahoma. We can grow vegetation 11 months out of the year. And so, we do have that going for us. And so timing is not as critical for us as it is for, folks to our north, but it's just, we're learning that we need to prepare the land and be ready for it to rain at any time, because the rainfall patterns seem to be much more extreme, more stochastic in nature, more random. And so that's been what we have found, at least in our environment. And we have been a bit unfortunate. I hate to use that word, but in regards to, there's a very small pocket, and you can see it on the drought map, actually, in South Texas, that is an extreme drought, and that's Southwest Bennett, Southeast Maverick counties. And for whatever reason, the way the rainfall patterns have laid out over the past couple of years, there's been a dry pocket here, but nonetheless, it's been more extreme weather, long extended periods of drought interrupted by a pulse of moisture. That pulse of moisture could be over 30 days, or it could be over 90 days. And then you may go 8 months without another measurable rainfall event. And so that's what we are trying to manage for.
So Chase, I'm curious, how are you thinking through it? Because this is very interesting to me from a pulse perspective. You're receiving rain, like you said, from, maybe 30 days, maybe at 90 days. And it seems like when you do receive it, it's maybe a substantial amount of rain, right, in a short time. Is that causing issues from a management, right? So it's like dry, and then all of a sudden you're not just turning on the faucet. You're a full blast on the faucet for a bit, and then you're turning it off again.
Yeah, so it has, and we've been, we were in rough shape 2 years ago at this time, and really ramped up and made some significant changes in our grazing program. And now we have more ground cover throughout. We're resting every acre on the ranch longer. And we're a very, very brittle environment. And right. So for us, it's all about, we want the animal impact. And that's something we weren't necessarily getting across the landscape as well as we are now. There was actually forage that was being underutilized, but then there was also portions of the pasture that were being overutilized or overgrazed, if you will. Right. And so, we went to smaller paddocks, a lot more paddocks. And what we've done is we're now allowing some of these pastures to rest for 300, I say pastures, they're more paddocks, but we're now getting 350 plus days of rest on some of these now. Like the main cow herd right now just came out of a block or a paddock that rested for 362 days. So we almost got a full year's rest on those particular acres. And so I know that may seem like a lot to some, but in our case, because it's such a brittle environment, and the more rest we can provide on a per acre basis, the more chance we are basically, it's all about time. We're increasing our chances to receive rainfall at some point when those acres are rested.
It makes total sense to me, Chase. I think, when we think about it being intentional in our management, rest is a tool in the toolbox, and it's probably the misunderstood tool, across the landscape. Hugh, I've really heard you say this many times, before, that the time to start planning for drought is when it's raining, and the time to start planning for rain is during the drought. And it's sort of what Chase is talking about. Can you explain, a little bit more from your point of view?
Yeah, I can. And it's back to exactly what Chase was talking about, is that we've got to be able to set up our pastures to receive the rain. And the key thing on that is making sure we have something there to interrupt the rainfall when it does come. We got to, we also, say quite often, it takes rain to grow grass, but it takes grass to grow grass, and it takes grass and grass residual in order to absorb the rain so they can infiltrate. And and if we graze everything off, the water's going to run off. So the more rest recovery, the more residual that we can actively manage for, the more water we're going to actually begin to infiltrate. Along that same line is being able to grow more forage, even if you can't utilize it or don't need to utilize it for an extended periods of time. In the environment that Chase is in, it'll store for a long period of time and have great feed value. Up in our part where we get a little more rainfall, it may not last quite as long, but the application of rest and recovery still has that same type of effect, where the more rest and recovery we can provide to a pasture, the more the more rainfall that we can actively receive and have more effective rainfall when it does come.
Yeah, and I think Hugh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chase. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think Hugh makes a very good point there. It's making the most of every drop of rain that hits the ground, and that's kind of been our approach and some of the changes we've made within our management. That's our end goal. We want a half-inch rainfall across the landscape to be as efficient as it can be, and capture every drop rather than it running off and going elsewhere. So
I think
Chase,
I was just going to say, one of the things that people are have the misnomer is that when it gets dry, we need to just open all the gates and just let the cattle get what they can get. But then actually, that's the worst thing we could do. If you can control them and maintain as much residual as possible, you're going to be much more responsive across your landscape when the rain does occur.
Yeah, Chase, what are the, some of the key things that you're looking at, across the landscape, or even maybe your cattle? What are those monitoring triggers that's, that you really look at preparing for, these extreme weather events?
Well, one of the things, we just discussed this actually, is I don't know that we were maximizing our rainfall events and getting the most out of them, as we just discussed. And, kind of the mentality we have taken now is that South Texas is a very unique environment. You both know this. It can be extremely, extremely productive when you have moisture. And so it's a very productive environment. You can grow a lot of vegetation. It's a very diverse environment. And so we have kind of taken on the mentality that, listen, we can't, at this point, our goal is to get there. We can't rest every single acre 350 plus days. Logistically, it just doesn't work out like that. And so our approach is, we want to stockpile enough forage in these paddocks so that if we do need to come through, let's just use paddock X, for example. If we want to come through paddock X, we want to stockpile enough forage to be able to go through there twice, essentially, with the main cow herd. And I'll give an example of what we call the goat trap. So it's 740 acre trap. We've divided that into numerous paddocks. And I only can tell you all this because it's fresh on my mind, but I'll just use paddock. I'll use the northwest paddock in that pasture. So in 2 years, we have been in that northwest paddock 3 different times. So we've actually been through it 3 different rotations on that paddock, but we've only been in that paddock for a total of 8 days in 2 years. So, it's rested for, 700. It's been grazed for 8 days, and it's rested for 722 days roughly. Right. Or sorry. Yeah. So 700. Yeah. So, and that's, been our approach. We want to, and we can go back through it now, to be honest with you, if it doesn't rain till March. And so that's been our approach, and we're trying to manage and keep these cattle on the move in a way that we're able to go through some of these paddocks more than once over the course of 2 years. And what we're seeing is we're getting a lot more animal impact across the landscape now on these smaller paddocks, and getting more litter on the ground, as you referred to, that residual matter. And we're just getting a lot more use out of our rainfall. We have several tanks now that we're worried about going dry because we're not getting the runoff we historically got in some of these areas. So
it provides a different issue then all of a sudden. At least your water
it does.
No, I've seen that in number of cases, Chase, and it's just another trigger to another.
We don't really. You were referring to what are some trigger points. Our approach down here, because drought is so much of what we do and so much a part of our environment, we've shifted our focus and mentality now to where we're constantly, I don't know that we necessarily have trigger points now. We're just constantly in drought preparation mode, regardless of how much rain we have received, because it's inevitable, it's coming. And we're just trying to be more prepared for, although we're in one now, we're just trying to be more prepared moving forward for the next one. And
that you're
so
really watching is cover, right? I mean, that's what you're focused on, is cover and being able to capture.
Yeah, we want to try to leave as much.
Yeah,
we want to try to leave as much cover behind. We want to capture, because we don't historically, our rainfall, our average, and you go back to what he was talking about earlier, I think average rainfall is a meaningless number at this point, but because we haven't had an average year now in 15 years. And so we just want, our average is around 20 inches. If we can get, and I tell everybody this, if I could get 10 to 12 inches consistently across the year, we can manage for that, and would be just fine with that. And so we just want to be able to maximize those 10 inches or those 12 inches. And so something I don't think we were doing before, we are by no means where we need to be. We're making progress, but I do feel like we're carrying more cover now through these droughts. And so when it does rain, the old saying, prepare the land for when it does rain. And so we're getting more out of these rainfall events than we were historically. And I look back, I was talking to Mr. Fitzsimmons about this, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and I was going through some old photo points and was looking at some of those areas out on the ranch. And I was just like, man, we are with about the same rainfall. We had about the same rainfall in 2020 as we did in 21, but I go back to some of these areas where we have photo points set up, and I look at the pictures I took last year this time, and we have 5, 6, 7 times the amount of forage in those same areas that we did last year. And so I feel better now about when it does rain, we'll be able to capture that moisture and make the most use of it. So to your point, that's probably our biggest, keeping the soil, that's probably our biggest trigger point, if you will. We want to keep the soil covered. That's our main objective. Keep as much residual matter on the ground. And so we capture, every drop of rainfall. So.
Yeah. And you answered kind of my question, I think, Chase, and one of the key things, right, in the monitoring aspect is you're doing photo points. You're kind of, you set a baseline and you're looking from it, and seeing the trends and where you're heading. And
yeah, and it's, I always tell people while I would love to, I don't have the time necessarily to go out and run line transects and Daubenmire frames. But, for us, and these photo points have always, the old saying, a photo is worth 1,000 words. They've been very helpful for us in a lot of different ways. And so we have I can't even tell you how many photo points we have now scattered across the ranch, but they're efficient. They tell a story. Whether that story is good or bad, then we can make adjustments, from a management standpoint. So,
Right.
That's one of the things that's probably underutilized. It's probably the simplest tool. In this day, when everybody's carrying a cell phone, you don't have a reason not to be capturing those pictures. But you're exactly right. That picture can tell you a whole lot about your history, and then you don't have to rely on your memory.
Hugh, you don't want to you want to add a little bit, kind of what you're dealing with, and from a management perspective, and what you're visiting with other landowners or land managers, really on some of the decisions that they can make to help their operation to navigate through these conditions.
Well, and one of the things that is probably a little more applicable to our producers up here is that we do have in general a more consistent rainfall pattern, although they're not as consistent as they have been. But as we move through the year, one of the tools I like to use is monitoring my water year. If you go from October 1 to spring, we typically know that's going to be a time of recharge if we get any moisture at all. And if you look at your monthly rainfall patterns, you can get a pretty good idea about how much moisture you expect to occur during those what we call recharge months. And in our part of the country, you'd expect it to be about 45% of your annual rainfall to come during that period of time. If you don't have that, you're behind going into the spring. So you expect spring to be a little bit slower. So you really got to be paying attention. And when you get into April, May, and June, that next quarter, that's when we're expecting to get our moisture that'll carry us through the year, the entire growing season for all practical purposes. So by the time we get into May, end of May, I expect to have about 30% of my annual forage production to have accrued, 25 to 30%. By the time I get to end of June, I expect it to be 60, 65%. And it almost corresponds with your moisture for the year, just going to lag just a hair behind when you get to that June period. So I'm watching really close. If I know that my variance from my normal is behind come May by, let's say 10, 15 percentage points, that's a pretty good safe value that you need to be preparing to destock by that amount if it continues to on that dry trend. Last year is a good example. April, we didn't get any rain. I was pulling out the drought plan. We know which cattle were going to be marketed the quickest, because truth is everybody kind of has spring fever in the spring. So you might as well identify the animals that need to be marketed during that period of time and make them available for someone to
Take
buy
advantage.
those cattle. Yeah, take advantage of the markets in that spring season. Even if it doesn't rain a whole lot, you typically going to have a little bit of spring moisture like we saw in 2011. So that's one of the ways that we were getting prepared for what we were seeing again this winter. But then in May, we got 50% more rainfall than we normally would expect, and it pulled us through. And then we had those consistent timely rains. So being able to monitor your rainfall, comparing it to your water year as you're going into the spring, then paying really close attention in the spring, how you're either recovering or how much ahead you might be, and then having your contingency plans, especially if it means moving cattle or to a different location or trying to market some cattle. Already identify what that plan is going to look like so that the decision is a whole lot easier. That's one of the keys, to have that contingency plan in place prior to it getting there. Otherwise, you may find yourself into that dilemma of what's the best decision, because then by the time that others are beginning to see the rain conditions and the markets respond, you're in the same boat as everybody else.
Yeah, it brings back bad memories, Aljoe, of in that 2011, and we had those folks we were working with that didn't have the contingency plan, wanted to hold those cattle,
right,
and then got to that extreme, right, and then they need to sell. Well, everybody else is selling and the market's down then, and then we would see those guys that would sell 30 head, utilize that money to buy more hay.
Mm-hmm.
They'd eat up that capital, and by the end they didn't have any cattle and they ate up their capital. And then when we started getting rains, and they didn't have the capital to get back in the game at the time.
Oh, I do. Yeah, when
Years.
everybody's selling, the prices are low, and when everyone's buying, the prices go high. So you're on the wrong end of the either way. Well, by identifying earlier, know as well as I do, the producers that took action early. Some completely destocked, some of them destocked significantly. They all made it through better than they ever had, and many of them the best financial years that they've ever had in 20, 30 years of ranching up to that point in time. And I think that just goes to show that if we plan for the worst and then act in a timely manner, we're always going to be better ahead, certainly financially, and then we know on our land resource that we will be, than you will if you wait and just try to ride it out. You can always get back in at a later date, but you can't. The timing of the sale right up front is really critical to see what your position is going to be financially after that sale. Is just due on timing. You want to be ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically putting through what Chase is doing, right? You're building that resiliency in the landscape.
Exactly.
That's kind of been good. And that's kind of been our motto is you plan for the bad days, and then the good days are even better. So,
well, and I think the other thing Chase has done is they implemented a lot more fencing, and I don't know if it's permanent or semi-permanent, but we also saw the producers that were able to, that had more pastures that they were managing through, had more subdivisions, could do a better job of determining the reserve herd days in front of them. They were always managing ahead, knowing that you've got to get to that next moisture event. In fact, you got to be 30 days past that moisture event. And those that have more ability to manage their grazing animals, they tend to manage their drought as much better as well.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there, Hugh. We can be in a drought and it rains on June 1st. Well, that doesn't mean June 2nd you have plenty of grass. So there's a lag period there that you have to compensate for as well.
Yeah.
We've kind of really focused, I think, a lot around the operational side of this drought, but we know that the drought trickles, down to other enterprises or other aspects of our ecosystem that we're managing. More kind of focused, that I'm kind of thinking about as a wildlife. And Chase, I know, wildlife enterprise and is crucial and a big part of the San Pedro. What are some of the things that you pay attention to or can share with others from that aspect?
Yes, Chad. So one of the biggest things we've done is, so we take a very, or we try to take a very holistic approach here. The wildlife, as you just mentioned, from an economic standpoint, are important to us, and so are our cattle. I would say they're equally important, and have, when you look at the books at the end of the year, they're 50-50, 55-45. It just kind of depends on the year. So they're both very important to us from an economic standpoint. And so, one of the things we've learned over time is you can't focus when you're trying to manage holistically. You can't focus too much on one aspect, because then there's unintended consequences on the other. And so, I'll just give you our deer population, for instance. We take, and not everybody will agree with this, but in our case, it works because, cattle are important to us, but so are wildlife. And so, we try to carry a very low deer density relative to most, which has paid huge dividends for us. And it's, our deer really haven't been impacted that much. We're carrying more ground cover now. And so our hope is that will trickle down, as you just mentioned, into, quail having more cover. A lot of these ground nesting birds that winter here, things of that nature, one of the things we did see this year, which we historically we typically have a pretty good monarch migration in the fall, and it was not near as good as it has been, and we feel that was probably a function of the drought. Our riparian zones, we did have a migration there to some extent, but historically here we usually have a pretty good monarch migration, and that didn't happen this year, and we feel there was just not much here for the monarchs to hang around too long. And so, but we feel that from a wildlife standpoint, we haven't been impacted near as much as one would think. But I think that goes back to that just being a function of managing the system as a whole, understanding that that the mother cow, she's not the only one using the landscape, and that white-tailed deer doe is not the only one using the landscape. So it's all about understanding that everything we do from a management standpoint across the landscape is impacting everything from a Texas tortoise all the way up to the white-tailed deer. And so we just try to take a very holistic approach on everything, and every decision we make, whether it's wildlife or cattle related, we try to factor in how is that decision going to impact the other positively or negatively. So
yeah, I think that's key. I mean, you're taking a holistic approach and managing at a system level, and it's paying off for you. Anything to add, Hugh?
And it's tough. Go ahead. Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's tough. You both know this very, very well. It's when you're managing an ecosystem, there's a lot of variables there that tend to not be in your favor, and so it can be a bit discouraging at times. But there's a lot of things, as you have stated, that you can do to be better prepared. And as I mentioned earlier, I think in what we're starting to see here, and by all means, we have a long way to go, and we learn something new every day. And it's interesting. The more we start to think we understand, the less we realize how much we know. But I do feel a little bit more confident now that our preparation will become more exponential in a good way over time for these, over the next 15, 20 years for these droughts. So.
I think that some of the things that we see, in this part of the world is that as the droughts hit, the wildlife are impacted as well. Within most, natural ecosystems, you would expect that. In good times, there's always abundance, and then in times when it's unfavorable, then typically the populations are going to moderate as well. But I think it's back to some of the things that have already been communicated, but the more resiliency we can build back in our systems, if you're managing for the entire ecosystem, and Chase, through that holistic type management, where you're looking at the good of all organisms, from the monarchs to the quail, the turkey, the deer, and the other organisms, what's good for the wildlife is going to be good for the livestock as well. So we're working with those in unison. I think makes a big difference, in being able to maintain those ecosystems in as pristine a state as you can, even in these dry conditions, are going to allow those populations to rebound that much quicker too.
Yeah, I think all good points. As they say, if it's good for the bird, it's good for the herd, right?
I like that. I hadn't heard that, Chad. That's a good one.
Yeah. So, is there any kind of key resources that either one of you may use or recommend to other land managers?
The ones that I
Go
guess
ahead, Hugh.
that come to mind is the drought monitor. This time of year, any of these weather and climate tools that you have available to you in your local region, just being constantly aware of what's going on there. Keep your own records. I mean, there's nothing more important than having your own records to compare to, even if you're looking at comparison of long-term trends, you want to know what your trends are. So I really appreciate hearing what Chase is doing with having so many rain gauges across those big ranches, because it changes from place to place, even in a relatively small geographic area. But when you're looking at thousands and tens of thousands of acres, you need to know, what's going on where. The Grazing Lands Coalition, the NRCS Extension has some information out there that could be extremely useful. Noble has some on their website. We're pulling up our drought website as well, just so that people have some resources to them, and then continually visiting with your different folks that are in the know, that get out and see things like yourself, Chad, and that see a lot of places, know where the drought's most extreme, where it's less extreme. Just the connections and networking make a big difference. So be talking with your neighbors and the people that that are talking with other people across the industry.
Yeah, and I think Hugh did a good job talking about some of these organizations that can help you out. And I just want to reiterate what he said is, keeping your own records, understanding, your ranch and what you're doing, what your goals and objectives are. It's, what we're doing here, at the San Pedro, and what someone is doing, 40 miles to our east may be different. And so it's just understanding that, piece of dirt, if you will, that you're working with. And, I think you mentioned on this, there's a lot of folks that have been old timers, if you will, that have been through this, and more times than we have. And so, using those resources and record keeping is extremely important in our opinion. And I think learning from your mistakes, don't be afraid to. We've made more mistakes than we've done good things. And so it's understanding, what you did previously that didn't work, and how do you address that and better manage for it moving forward.
And I think I just say one other thing, that if you may not be one to use it or want to use it for various reasons, but the USDA Risk Management Agency's pasture and rangeland and forage programs, just talking with the guys that are representing those different entities, they have really good rainfall records, and they also are tracking it for over longer periods of time. So just being in the know, whether you use them or not, they're in the business to study that. So that's another good resource to track.
Yeah, no, that's another good point. And I think, Chase, I think you made a really good point in that. And, and we've all had friends, and Chase, you're in it right now, and have been, is that a lot of times it gets hard, right? When we're managing and we get in these really extreme droughts, and you just think like we'll never get out of it. And there will be that time you just sort of, you hit that brick wall. But to know that you're not in it alone, right? There's a lot of, like you said, neighbors and friends and that have been in the situation that can help. And I think that's another key point. And, on that, I appreciate both of you joining us today. I learned a lot just talking through this, and appreciate both of you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit.
Yeah, likewise. It was a pleasure to be on with both of you all, and Hugh, I wish you the best up there.
Well, same to you, and I know that if you get the moisture, typically I will too. So I'm hoping and praying you get yours first, and I'll take whatever's left over.
Likewise. Well, listen, thank you both for everything you all do and the impact y'all have across Oklahoma and Texas. So
yeah, thank you, Chad, for having these podcasts. These are just one of these tools that we have to open and available to producers, and I appreciate you leading the charge on trying to keep communication lines open.
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, timely decisions are, is what makes a success. And hopefully this is definitely a timely topic and discussion, and hopefully we can help some other land managers across the land make them better, and help empower them. So lastly, I just want to, remind our listeners to rate and review our podcast to help spread the word about our working lands and conservation. And have a blessed one till next time. Thank you.
Beyond the Fence Line is brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, dedicated to conserving the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. Find out more at txaglandtrust.org.